right, so it's working. So as we come to the end of the symposium, I'm actually going kind of to the beginning, which is when you have a few plants, how do you make many? And why might that be interesting to businesses when you can just go and pick these wild plants for free? So I work with Tinder van Andel and Barbara Kravindil and Hugo de Boer on orchids. And I'm also going to say thank you to Instruct Distillery and Main Coast Sea Vegetables because they said it was okay for me to share some little interesting things that I've talked about with them. So, 3 case studies. I'm interested in a little show of hands here. Who's eaten porphyra or pyropia seaweeds? Okay, if I tell you that it's the seaweed that's in sushi, sushi nori, who might have eaten sushi? Yes! And that's why $0.95 billion a year. It's really quite widely eaten. It's also one of the most valuable seaweeds. And it's talked about in wet tons because when you pull it out the water, it's wet. And then also it takes a while to actually dry out the seaweed itself. So the next thing I'm talking about is also edible. And don't worry, I don't go to field sites and eat everything and destroy the species that are being studied. These are species that I'm a little interested in because they're actually in trade. 2 of them are mostly collected from wild plants, pretty entirely actually. One of them is in cultivation now. So Salep, I'll talk to you about these orchids I work on with this gang of Scandinavians and Dutch people. Why are they interesting? Well, 15 tons a year, over 15 tons a year are traded, and that comes from 30 to 120 million wild plants. And it's destructive harvesting, so that's pretty interesting. And a little worrying as well. And then juniper. I think you all might have tasted juniper. Maybe. Gin is the defining ingredient in gin. It's not gin if there's no juniper. And last year, for the first time, gin sales in the UK exceeded £1 billion. Now, a lot of that is alcohol tax, but you can see that juniper is actually quite an interesting species in trade. And it's quite hard to get volumes of how many juniper berries, is what people call them, they're technically cones, how many of them in terms of weight are actually traded, because the FAO has got nice statistics on seaweeds, but it's not got values on all this global trade in juniper. Right, so propagation. Most plants in agriculture, they were easy to grow, or they were very amenable to people selecting them and picking out the traits which made them easy to grow and do what we wanted. But with science and technology developing, we're actually able to cultivate more species. So some plants are becoming more of an option for us to grow on a wide scale and not just use them from the wild. But it's not always economically viable. And when we're talking about trade and business, there is that bottom line of finance. So this is Porphyra umbilicus. So I'm just showing you what that seaweed looks like before it's on sushi. Kind of like a flappy, flattish, wavy algae. Now, it's actually been cultivated for centuries. And you can see when Hiroshige was painting Mount Fuji, a view of Mount Fuji, for the ethnobotanist, it's a nice painting because check it out. You can see how people are actually growing seaweed. They get bamboo sticks, plant them in the seabed, and then the seaweed would grow on it. And you could get a harvest because already, centuries ago, demand for this seaweed exceeded wild supply. There's a problem though, it's very unreliable harvests. And, you know, if you get a typhoon and it rips up your bamboo sticks and everything, your harvest is destroyed. But also, the seaweeds didn't always grow. It was a bit hit and miss. Now, and that was the case for a long time. Until if you go to Japan, there's actually a small town, and there's a statue of someone called Kathleen Drew Baker. She's never been to Japan, but she did something really important for the Japanese seaweed industry. She worked out that they actually have a day honoring her as well. I mean, she's really the boss there. Oh, this works. So here's the little flappy bit, the bits that you're used to eating. I don't, if you know about, do you know about the sex lives of seaweeds? It's really complicated and weird life cycle. So I've compressed it a bit here. Don't worry too much what's going on here. But what is going on, and this is what Kathleen discovered. She discovered that this filamentous algae, which actually people thought was a different species, that's Porphyra umbilicus. And if you want to grow Porphyra umbilicus and other seaweeds that have a similar life cycle, this is the bit that you get hold of, and you get it to after her discovery of this life cycle, some Japanese scientists got together and they worked out how to get the sporophyte phase into the nets, and then you put the nets in the sea and the seaweed grows. But that's how you grow it. You can't plant little seeds or little flappy bits of algae and expect it to multiply. So that's the science behind seaweed propagation of this type. Now, what's happening? Your sushi might get a little bit more expensive. There's been a 35% increase in price from last year. So that's actually quite a lot. Why is that? Well, it's to do with yield decreasing and demand remaining high. So in China, the harvest last year was 4.4 billion sheets of nori. This year, they were only expecting 2 billion sheets. And, we're in July, and the seaweed harvesting is really sort of around this time. That's it for the year, because then it's going to rest phase. So it's a pretty good, reliable estimate. Korea and Japan are also affected. Taiwan, possibly less so. So this is like seaweed business chatter that someone very kindly shared with me. So why did this happen? Double cropping. Other species are being grown too. These things called sea grapes went on the nets, and sea grapes are a different kind of seaweed. They're from Australia. They actually look like a bunch of tiny grapes, but if you're trying to grow Porphyra and other species and it's got this miniature bunches of grapes on them that have stopped your Porphyra from growing and they're in the way of actually getting your Porphyra off, they reduce your yield. And also there were high sea temperatures during the really critical spore nurturing period. So this means it reduced how many Porphyra got going, and it reduced their performance. So that's going to be an interesting thing for the industry to address, because sea temperatures being a little bit warmer is not necessarily something that's going to go away. Now, we're going to quickly switch to a different example. I wanted to give you 3 really different examples. So I'll give you some seaweed, which people think is boring, but I think is exciting. Now we're going to orchids, which lots of people think are exciting, and you shouldn't eat them. Here are the species used to make salep. So they're sort of Mediterranean orchids, very pretty flowers. We don't care about the flowers. What we're talking about is the tubers. So this is an Ophrys bee orchid that's just been dug up. You can see the tubers when they're fresh. And then when they're dried, just like this, well, what would you do with this? You make amazing chewy ice cream. Check it out. It's like all stringy. It's quite, I have eaten it. I probably shouldn't say that at a conservation conference, but I have. Because how do you talk to people and get to know what they're doing if you're going to not touch the thing that's special? This is also, it makes a drink which people report as having medicinal uses. It's quite nice in the winter, it's warming, it's a bit viscous. And this is what the powder looks like. If you go into an acta or a herb shop, you can buy it. So now you know what salep is. I'm not going to name people who've consumed it, but I'm sure there's some in this room who have. How do you grow orchids? Well, they're really picky, and they have minions. So in the wild, orchids rely on mushrooms, on fungal partners to do the hard work and get them going. So when orchids are cultivated, they have lab technicians who nurture them on a little bed of agar gel, and it's all sterile, and there's nothing to upset them on there or compete with them. It's got all the nutrients they need. They get perfect light, perfect temperature, and slowly their microscopic seeds grow. And depending on species, after a couple of years of this, you get a whole orchid plant. There's a mature one, it's got flower, it's got tubers, but that's taken a couple of years. So if you're looking at propagating orchids by micropropagation, and you want to then sell them as an alternative to wild orchids, how does that compare? Well, we've got 280 Turkish lira per kilo of salep tubers. So that works out at about, because the tuber weight varies quite a lot, so it's about 1 or 12 cents to a tuber. So how much does an orchid, a mature orchid on the market, produced by micropropagation cost? This is a really big gap. This is 14 to 24 euros, depending on species. So this is this is not really an alternative at the moment. Now we're going to go to the next example, which is juniper engine. Okay, so for a long time, most of the juniper engine was from Tuscany. And then a couple of years ago, Macedonian juniper got quite hot, and everyone's using that for their gin because it's superior and better taste and better quality. Now there's some Albanian juniper coming up. It's getting in on the scene. And also in the UK, people are starting to use English and Scottish juniper in their gins. Now, juniper in England is kind of like a panda bear. It's really crap at reproducing, really crap. And they're declining. They've had a bit of habitat loss, but they're just really bad at reproducing. So this is an interesting thing. They're becoming a bit trendy for being in gin, but that's really not a good when a species is somewhat declining. So why? Well, if you've got a group of about 100 trees, juniper has male trees and female trees. So if you're harvesting juniper and you've got a population where about 80 of those trees are male, you're only collecting off 20 trees, and that's actually quite high pressure. So that's one problem is the ratio of male and female trees. Also, they're not actually fertile for that long. They don't really start producing berries until they're about 4 to 9 years old. When they get middle-aged, they kind of give up. They can live to be more than 100 years old, but the actual amount of time that they're producing fruits is quite short. And also, they might produce some fruits when they're little 4-year-olds, but you're not going to get a big yield of a little stumpy tree that's sort of just about knee-high. So that's a problem. It's not going to be high yield for a long time. And then air pollution, they're very dainty. If a little particle, a solid particle that's a pollutant in the air lands on the cone instead of a pollen grain, the fruit will form, but there isn't a viable seed in there. So also they have really short seed viability. It's just a couple of years. Now I know some things have shorter viability than that, but if your seed requires 2 cold winters to germinate and your viability is about 2 to 4 years, it's not a good strategy. So they also need cold winter temperatures, which again is a little bit problematic with some of the changes in global weather systems. But even if they manage to germinate, rabbits destroy them. They're juicy, tasty little shoots. They get eaten by rabbits. If they manage to get above knee-high, then there's a disease, Phytophthora. I can't pronounce that. And that's starting to affect some of the adult trees. So wild juniper in England and Scotland isn't the greatest candidate for harvesting. However, this is Inshirac Gin. It's made by Walter. He has an estate on the banks of the Spey, and he's got a really healthy population of juniper. It's very big. But Walter and I, we've been talking about how we might make sure that that population carries on going. One, so he can keep on making gin, and also because juniper is actually really valuable for wildlife in the UK. There's over 38 species of insects that actually rely on it. Birds eat the berries, and there's other insects in which it's part of their lifestyle. You know, they'll visit it, but there are 38 species on which they actually require juniper. So we want to make sure it's there. So thinking about propagating juniper, is it going to work out for Walter? Well, the Cairngorms, last winter it wasn't cold enough. They did not have good snow. They didn't actually really get a proper winter. So what can we do about that? A fridge. You can do this thing called cold stratification. You can give your seeds a bit of a cold phase in a fridge. They don't know it's a fridge. They don't care. Then materials. It's really negligible. We can do a little seed bed, pop the seeds in the fridge when they need to be cold, then plant them out. It's really, we're not talking about much materials. Time and labor. Basically, move them into the fridge, move them out the fridge, plant them out, keep the weeds off, sit there, twiddle your thumbs for 2 years while they're thinking about germinating, and then they'll start to germinate. But they're kind of, it's a low maintenance thing. Land tenure. So when you're thinking about nurturing this little precious thing that takes 2 years to decide if it's going to germinate, and then it takes 4 years to start fruiting at best, and then it takes another 10 years to get going, you really need secure land tenure. And And Walter has that because it's like his home, his, it's his family place, so he's not going anywhere. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of 3 different things. Now, what do we think about the economic viability of the porphyra? Well, it actually costs quite a lot to propagate them, but they are very high value, so it's worth it. It'll be interesting to see how the industry is going to tackle the changing sea temperatures. It could be cultivar selection, could be trying to do something the spore development phase in a different location. We'll see. Saleb, that's not working out at the moment, but I'm actually working on that in Holland with the Dutch growing expertise and a few people. So we'll see if we can narrow the gap between a propagated plant and a wild collected plant. Can they actually become closer in price? Juniper, if you've got time and you can wait, then yes, it's a viable thing from a business perspective to grow. And that is the end. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Okay.
I can't believe no one had any questions about gin and ice cream plants. Okay, so thanks, Suzanne. We ran over slightly, but I think Sophie is going to join us again to answer the questions. So, yeah, if you could link up with her, please. If you could all come up, but I mean, we have one. I think we have one hand microphone. Yeah. Yeah.
La persona a la que está llamando no puede atenderle, pero puede dejar un...
I don't know what's going on. Yeah. Oh, I switched up. Well, I think Sophie's coming back any second to answer her questions. But we did have a question before about... I've forgotten what it was. It was collectors. How to find them.
Would the lady in the middle like to...
Oh, wait, Sophie's here.
Oh, hi, Sophie. Hey, Sophie. Hello.
Okay.
Okay, so actually, the lady next to... Is it Gary? Hi. The lady had a question before. Would you like to repeat your question again?
Should we go to
and we'll
Sophie
just...
first?
yeah.
Here.
Yes.
Sure. This wasn't really for Sophie. It was for all of you people that are dealing with. And I think somebody answered this question already. Of how you encourage these people that have secret private collections to donate their collections or to get involved or to collaborate with you.
Okay. Does anyone want to answer that while we're waiting for Sophie to type?
I could start. So, for instance, with the family Cactaceae, there are basically cactus and succulent groups across the world. They're in pretty much every state in the United States. They're in different cities sometimes within the state. So there are relatively easy ways to get in contact with those people. Like, for instance, I give talks at those meetings sometimes just as sort of an outreach and talk to them about research and things we're doing at the Botanic Garden and ways that maybe they could join in with us and help us learn from them and them learn from us. And also, I try to talk to them about conservation and the importance, and most people are very open to what I have to say and actually, have a certain amount of knowledge themselves about these wild populations. So it's a really nice back and forth oftentimes, and people tend to be relatively open, as long as, it's certainly, a delicate situation, and it has to be treated that way, but it can work out.
How about in Colombia, with your work with all of those orchid societies and different other stakeholders? How have you found that, Tatiana?
Actually, I got here like 2 years ago. Like, we started working together a year ago. So it wasn't me. They have already set up a collaboration between the Botanical Garden and the Colombian Orchid Society, and I got there a little bit later, and then we formed this collaboration that is open to everyone. We say that we are 3 institutions right now because these are the main researchers. The rest of the people that are involved in this group are students. So they were the ones who actually started this and look for us, and they are the ones who want to come to the meetings and to do their journals a little bit more scientific, so I don't think that we have to do anything. They just look for us.
Can I add a little something? So that's really interesting. So you already had the relationship between the botanical and the research community. It was a good relationship with the private, more amateur side of things, and there was presumably trust and credibility on both sides. So I think perhaps in America, in the USA, in UK, perhaps in Europe, sometimes there's a bit more friction or a little bit more mistrust. So I understand why horticulturalists are worried about this. We have very strict rules on the legality and being able to traceability of plants. And if you cannot prove to a botanical institution that your material was collected legally and ethically, then a lot of institutions, we can't go near it, and that's for very clear reasons. So building that trust up can be quite difficult, and I think that's the stage that we have some organisations, as I talked in my talk, are working towards that.
Yeah, can I say something? That we do have that problem. I mean, it's not. I don't want you to think that we don't have any legal problems about these collections. I mean, these collections, most of the collections are illegal, in a way. So we have to work with them towards legalizing this somehow, But yeah, we have a good relationships among us, but we don't have this legal framework to do things yet.
Great, yeah. So as you can see, Sophie is back with us, and she has answered the questions that we had before. Thanks, Sophie. It's good to see you again. Lauren, it was your question, and it's gone off the screen, and I forgot what it was. So would you like to remind us what the question was?
So it was the alternatives to using Shetty?
Yes.
And then also Lucas was asking about
The second question. Oh no.
Yeah, more the horticultural industry. So, Sophie, would you like to go through your answers there? Just maybe say what you say there.
Horticulture industry only about that I've seen a chassis and the technology actively engaged in the understanding of their supply and don't care what their cost of sustainable sources. Wild houses tend to be poor, their livelihoods. They tend to shanty house and teaching the wild hands to cultivate shanty may help. And we need to understand the limitations such as land access and financial resources.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you, Sophie.
It's red, fat is red. I don't discriminate.
So very much around education and awareness raising. So the horticultural industry probably doesn't even know or realise that they're damaging things in the wild.
Okay. Well, I think we've run over by quite a long time. I think we might be done with our session, and it's been a really exciting session. Thank you everyone for coming. I'd also just like to thank Freya St. John, who is off camera there, who has been helping Hi, Freya.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks to Sophie for joining us. It's been great. And thanks to all of our speakers. And thank you to everyone who's made this possible, and to Law, and to everybody. It's been a really good session. Thank you.
Conference organisers.
Yes, the conference organizer.
Thank you to everyone who's helped organise this.
Great. Really lovely. It's funny.
So Sophie's glad. So thank you very much. And she's really glad that the conference doesn't discriminate against people with challenging circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.